Maybe I'm still recovering from playing the monster game Stalingrad 42 by GMT, but this week I felt like playing something smaller and lighter, so I went on Wargame Vault and I looked for a small print-and-play game, also because it had been a while since I had printed and played a print-and-play game. So a game that caught my attention was Into the Pocket, Operation Winterstorm. Incidentally, the theme is related to that of Stalingrad 42. Because we are in World War II, we are in December 1942, and the game depicts a German attempt to create a corridor to free the German Sixth Army that was at the time trapped in the Stalingrad pocket. So it's a game for 2 players, German versus Soviet, and in this game, the Germans are the attackers, the Russians are the defender, and creating a corridor that will relieve the pocket is the objective for the German player. The German player is almost the only player to score points by placing units in this area here, by creating a corridor from this area to that area. And the Soviet player can score points by eliminating a lot of German units, but mainly the Soviet player scores points by preventing, or achieves victory by preventing the German player from scoring too many points. A word about the map. For some reason, I don't know why, I couldn't use the color printer to print a poster size version of the map, so I still printed the map in color here, listing one sample, so I could use it for setup and just to get a sense of where things are. To print the poster version, which was the playable version, so I could only use the black and white printer, and so then I simply added a red line here for setup. I highlighted the rivers, and here in green, the pocket. It's not as pretty as it will be when you will print it in color on your printer, but it worked. It worked well enough for me. And if you're wondering about what these holes are, is because I plan to store the game in a binder. Now, the game is a hex encounter game. As you can see, lasts 12 turns. It uses units represented by fairly traditional counters, like the ones that you see here. Gray and green for the axis, representing Germans and Romanian units respectively. Red and brown for the Soviets. The things that you see here, the first value at the bottom left is attack value, then we have defense value, then we have movement. If the attack value has a yellow background, that means that the unit qualifies for tank bonus in combat. However, if the unit has a yellow background around the defense value, that denies that because this is an anti-tank unit. If there is a white background behind the movement factor, the unit is motorized and it qualifies for movement during the exploitation phase. Now, during setup, and I'm not necessarily doing things too accurate, I'm just throwing some units there to give you a sense. During setup, you will have, of course, a front of German units ready to go on this side of the board, and you will have some scattered Russian defenders here in the middle of the board. Most importantly, you will have a large number of Russian units here. They are placed on reserve, and that is indicated by the letter R in the top right corner of the unit. They do not activate until the German units attack them, or they move close to them, or until later in a turn. So as the German player may try to smash them right away, or try to create your corridor, but know that at some point they will be released. Actually, another important piece of information, are stacking values. You can have up to 9 stacking points. Again, here in this corner, you have either the turn of entry or an R if that is a reserve unit. If there is nothing in this area, it means that the unit is on the board at setup. And then, actually, at least for the German player, the small number here is important. It indicates the division, and that is important because each player's turn, the players receive support from divisional artillery well, the Soviet player only gets one army artillery support, but basically once per game turn, the German player can use artillery support once for each division, as long as there's a unit of that division involved in the combat. So if these two units are working together in an attack, I could call for artillery from the 6th and from the 17th. Now, each turn is divided into 2 players' turns, which have the same 3 phases, but plot twist, they are in different order from each other. The German player turn, the German player always goes first. The first has a movement phase, then an attack phase, and then an exploitation phase. The Soviet player then goes and has an exploitation phase, then an attack phase, then a movement phase. Remember, during the exploitation phase, only motorized units move. That means that at the beginning of the turn, the Soviet player doesn't have much to do, especially early on. And if the Soviet player is to attack, so they'll be stuck attacking in whatever position the German players place the game pieces during their phase, and then they get to move, so to reposition things, but again, then they will take the brunt of another attack. It's very hard early on for the Soviet player. It's not unlikely that almost all of the units in the middle of the board will be wiped out, but those reinforcements are coming from the north, as I said, and also reinforcements will become later on from that side there, right next to the pocket. So do not despair, Soviet player, just hold on and do your best, and we'll see what happens. And yes, do not do the not one step back. You take some hits, you run and hide on the other side of the next river, and continue like this until maybe you don't lose the game. Maybe the German player does not create too efficient a corridor from one side of the board to the pocket. Now, movement is pretty much what you expect. During the movement phase, units will move up to their full movement allowance, spending movement points depending on the terrain costs and some hex side costs. During movement, you can launch overrun attacks if you have enough movement points to spend to enter the X that you're entering, plus 2 movement points for zone of control. Yes, most units project a zone of control in the 6 axis is surrounding them, and that anyways, in any case, it always costs 2 extra movement points. If you want to launch an overrun attack, you must enter there, spend also the movement points for the zone of control, and have 2 extra movement points left. If that is the case, then hooray, good for you. You can launch an overrun attack. And again, early on, the German player will want to do that often because you just need to move fast before those reserves arrive. So for movement, nothing too strange. The attack phase combat is traditional. We look at the combat table, and we already know that to resolve combat, you will total all of the combat factors of the attackers, say, in this cases, divide them by the combat factor of the defender, turn them into a ratio that will give you a column, and then we apply column shifts and die roll modifiers. Players have air support they can spend, but only in clear weather. Armor, again, remember those yellow factors, but they can be negated by the yellow box of the defender. And so that will give you modifiers to the die roll. As for the column, it is modified mainly by artillery, we'll talk about that, but also by terrain, and here the rivers are the big givers of defenses, of defensive shifts, but only full units are attacking from the other side of the river. And then we have formation integrity. If all units in a formation participate, then you get that bonus. As for artillery, as I said, it is abstracted. Simply you choose when you want to spend those column shifts. And here you have a record to keep track of how many and which artillery supports you use in each player turns. So you can get to use them during the German player turn, and then during the Soviet player turn, and so basically twice per turn. So each German division has an artillery support that is a column shift that you can just invest when a unit of that kind is involved, plus an army artillery support, so you can use it to support anybody, plus a rocket support, which again you can use to support anybody, but only during the attack phase. That's why it's indicated there. The same for the Soviets. The Soviets only have an army support and a rocket support, which again can only be used in attack, so during the Soviet phase of the turn. German optional, the German player may choose to bring in some extra units that also come with their support, but that gives victory points to the opponent. So you can mark this thing here, or you can do like I do, place wooden cubes so you don't get the thing dirty. So once you have all of your column shifts and all of your combat die roll modifiers, you roll a die, cross-reference, and the result will give you a number of hit points that are taken by the defender and or the attacker, in which case you simply lose a step for each number indicated there. Multi-step units are reduced to the reduced side. If they already had a hit or they are on the reduced side, they're eliminated. Classic. And then we also have retreats. Well, guess what? You got to retreat, and if the defender is not where it used to be, either because they retreated or they eliminated, then you can immediately perform advance after combat. We are still in the German player turn. After movement and attack, we have the exploitation phase, in which the motorized units which are not in enemy zones of control get to move and attack if they so desire. And I did that because, like in many games of this kind, if a stack retreats in an enemy zone of control, the stack loses an extra step. So actually surrounding the enemy and then force them to retreat into zones of control is a big element of this game, as it is of so many other games, especially on the Eastern Front in World War II. This is the general idea. Those are the three phases, but as I said, the Soviet player does them in a different order. First, exploitation. So in this case, this unit would not get to activate because it is an enemy zone of control. But this unit, motorized, not in the enemy zone of control, could activate during the exploitation phase. Then the attack phase, when you declare combat. Then the movement phase, where anybody can move. That's how you play the game. Continue like this from 12 turns, and then you see who did best, who achieved their objectives best, in which case, remember, for the German player to open a corridor towards the pocket, for the Soviet player to prevent that from happening. And at that point, at the end of the game, the player who scored the most points wins the game. This game was exactly what I needed to recover from playing a monster game. Into the Pocket is a really good, tiny game. Not that tiny, they're tinier. Tiny Battle is the name of the line, but postcard games are tinier. It's a small game, but it actually is pretty meaty. You have 12 turns, and those 12 turns create an arc, create a narrative that definitely is an interesting one. It follows historical lines, but well, especially as the German player, you'll think maybe I can do it this time, maybe I can do it differently. But definitely it is an interesting challenge. I find it particularly challenging for the German side, and in particular, playing the German side, it's harder, but the first couple of turns is also a lot more interesting because there isn't all that much that as the Soviet player you can do other than taking a lot of punishment and try to move back and look for better positions to defend until you release, or the German does that for you, you release those forces towards the top of the map, and until you get reinforcements, you are gonna take a lot of punishment, but still, you know that is coming. And then the Germans, meanwhile, their mighty divisions are weakened, they have lost some units, and so actually the first couple of turns, although as a Soviet player you don't do much, you still have the satisfaction of seeing the enemy units at least weakened, which is really all that you need to do. And then the line of the front is likely to change, so you still have a sense of a World War II event. It's not just attrition on a single line that moves slowly, because the German player will probably want to keep a a front, like a vertical front across the board, or maybe open a little bit, because you're always at risk of being encircled from units that may be in the lower side of the map. But later, when those units come from up there, then you have to really work towards the tunnel. But then the problem is units come from the other direction, so you'll be stretched thin precisely when you're weak, precisely when the opponents have a lot of units. So it gets really challenging. But it is to say, as the game progresses, it presents different situations, different challenges for both sides, which of course gives gameplay more variety. The complexity to me is just right. You have this classic system of the combat odds, there's definitely a classic feel to it, but it's simple, it's linear, and yet you have interesting decisions, especially when it comes to assigning artillery, when it comes to trying to get some combat shifts, because divisional integrity is really good. But that also means that you can only have artillery support, one artillery support that combat if everybody in that division is there. But if you have a combat in which you have units from multiple divisions, as long as you have at least one unit from a division, you can call on the artillery for that division. So trade-offs, you get the shift for integrity, then you don't get as much artillery. You mix and match things, you get artillery from a lot of directions for maybe that pivotal battle that you hope is going to be pivotal, but maybe it will be, maybe it will not be. Plenty of challenges for both players. Gameplay moves fast, it's fluid, it's intuitive, and yet it has enough historical flavor, and yet it has enough historical identity and chrome to really give you the sense that you're playing an historical war game. So in essence, Into the Pocket is a fun game. I found it very satisfying, especially for a game that is so simple, so small. You can play it definitely in an evening. Maybe you can even squeeze 2 games in an evening. You can play solitaire. Doesn't have a lot of hidden information. Well, technically it doesn't have any, but there's still a lot. Well, there's some. You may adapt some Fog of War, but not in the sense that you will really, there will be big surprises there. Yet, still playing both sides at the best of your possibilities, you will have enough puzzles and dilemmas to solve that the game will be interesting. That is the way I played it, and that is also the way I enjoyed it. It's a fun little game, and I believe that a lot of people out there, especially war gamers, and also aspiring war gamers, I think that all of these people will enjoy it too.